Hello, everyone. My name is Gregory, and this is The View from Out Here. October 11th is National Coming Out Day, and it got me to thinking about my own coming out story. That and a friend sent me an article that she had read about a book out there by a straight conservative Bible Belt Christian fellow who went undercover as a gay man to try to get a view of what life is like for gay people in the United States. Now, I haven't read the book, but based on the article, I would recommend it to every heterosexual or person who thinks that they might be. The book is called Across in the Closet by Timothy Currick. I'll put a link in the description below in case you're interested. Every gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and/or questioning person who has ever made the journey has a coming out story. I have one too. I came out in 1980 when I was 28 years old, but the story begins in Detroit, Michigan, before I was old enough to recognize what an age was. A little background is in order. I'm an orphan and was given up at birth. I'm told that for the first 2 years of life, I was raised by whoever was on duty at the time at a Catholic orphanage in Detroit. I was adopted at just over 2 years by a family that was having marital trouble and believed that having children might save the marriage. Evidently, it did not. By the time I was 6, my also adopted brother Mike and I sat outside a courtroom in St. Clair County, Michigan, while both parents, now remarried, decided it was best for everyone to go their separate ways. Mike and I became wards of the state and were separated on the spot. We didn't see one another again until after I had graduated from high school. He's pretty much a stranger to me, a childhood friends with closer than usual ties, I guess. This chain of events evidently affected me pretty deeply because I got tossed around from living situation to living situation until I was until I was 13. Up until I was accepted to the famous Father Flanagan's Boys Town, immortalized in the movie Boys Town with Spencer Tracy and Mickey Rooney, I had never been through 2 grades in the same school. I was in therapy a couple of times because I was an odd little boy. Here's what one doctor said in his psychological evaluation of me at 11 years old. During the interview, Dr. Lockett found Greg to have average or better intelligence, to be proper and distant but cooperative. He showed little anxiety. He uses extremely strong defenses of denial, intellectualization, and rationalization. Denial is mostly on the conscious level and may be a denial of being male on the subconscious level. This denial started early, thus forming a personality pattern of which his overt feminine character pattern is only a part. Dr. Lockett suggested that initial rejection led to lack of involvement with others, for which Greg developed a survival pattern. Greg has a basic personality problem with relating to others. Although it's not definitely known, one could say that there's a distortion in Greg's relationship to his mother and a lack of involvement with his father. Dr. Lockett diagnosed him as having a passive, receptive, feminine personality pattern. He further described Greg as being narcissistic, involved more with self than with others, masochistic, as evidence in his passivity in the face of scapegoating, relatively unrelating, unmotivated, and markedly defensive. He probably has overwhelming anger, but good defenses. Greg's future depends on how much anxiety can be aroused as he becomes older. He may become anxious and do something. Dr. Lockett recommended long-term placement in a total care environment for all of his childhood. Wow. Now, I didn't repeat all of that to put my business in the street or to invoke your sympathy, but to show how gay people were thought of by the psychological community at the time. Remember that in the big picture, psychotherapy was barely older than I was. Boys who were effeminate were thought of in these terms because of the profound and dramatic lack of understanding of human sexuality. So much so that in the last sentence in the evaluation, The good doctor recommends that I be sent to a mental institution. When it comes to my sexuality, I really was the last one to figure it out. When I read this evaluation today, I see a little gay kid trying to make his way in a very rigidly straight world pretty much on his own. They didn't like gay kids back then. I had been rejected by 4 different sets of foster parents by the time I was 13, very likely because I was gay. I'm not surprised that there may have been a little trauma there. Of course, I didn't understand what all the fuss was about because I had always been like I was. I didn't have anything to compare it to. Now, along with the family dysfunction stuff, there was also the Catholic Church. That's where I grew up most of the time. Catholic schools are pretty rigid to begin with, but when you actually live there, it's even more intense. It becomes indoctrination. Your parental figures are nuns, brothers, and priests. So, as any good Catholic boy might want to do, I clung to my religion to help me through it. It was the only constant in my life. It was always there, regardless of where I was living at the time or what family I was in or what the circumstances were. I didn't know that a person could normally be gay because I was taught that the devil was tempting me to sin and that I was straight but morally weak. So I tried to become stronger in my resistance, believing that I was doing what I was supposed to do. I did pretty well, too. It took me so long to settle with who I am because of my intent to be worthy in the eyes of God, according to my religion. Around the late 70s, I began to seriously question whether what I was being told about being gay by people that I looked up to for spiritual guidance and direction may have been being a little bit less than honest with me about it. It turns out that, well-intentioned as they may or may not have been, they didn't know what they were talking about, and I had to spend nearly half of my life figuring it out on my own. I had struggled with this demon for my entire life and was getting pretty weary of the struggle, mainly because I, like everyone else at that age, was raging with hormones, and I finally just couldn't take it anymore. I remember the day clearly, even some 40 years later. I was sitting in a house in Phoenix, Arizona, and I had my feet propped up on the windowsill and was casually kicked back in my lounger when I just gave up the fight. It was clear that I could not go on like this, always fighting myself over what I was feeling inside against everything I had been taught a boy was supposed to be. I knew I was facing the probability that I would lose all of my friends and family and have to start all over again, just like when I was a kid being moved from place to place about every year. But this war was going to kill me if I didn't find a way to make peace with it. So I just let it all go. I just stopped fighting and gave myself permission to just be. Anyway, back to the story. I just gave up the fight. It's as simple as that. I realized that I was never really in the fight. I had already lost the battle when I was born. I determined that if I was going to hell and would never be whole as a person anyway, then screw it. I'm going to go ahead and be what I am and let the chips fall where they may. Because being what I was taught I was supposed to be was making me hate myself and live a miserable existence. I just couldn't do it. A few days later, embarking on my new life for the first time, I went to a gay bar in Phoenix called Hisco Disco. I had read about it in a gay magazine that I found at a porno bookstore. Back then, that's where you had to go to find information about your culture if you were gay. It was still being oppressed everywhere else. It's kind of sad when I think about it today. In order to find the door to a peaceful inner life, you had to go to the one place in the world where furtive sexual frustration and repressed emotions were the most prominent energies happening. My first exposure to gay culture was a life-changing experience for me, to say the least. I have never before or since had more intense feelings of conflicting emotions as I did that night. I walked in, ordered a drink, sat at the table out of the way as I could find, and watched for a while. One part of me was disgusted and repulsed at what I was seeing, And the other part of me was instinctively jumping for joy at having found a place in the world for the first time in my life where I was seeing my own imagination displayed right before my eyes in real time. These guys were kissing each other and holding one another like there was nothing wrong with it, right there in front of everybody, and nobody was recoiling in horror, except for me, maybe. what what a beautiful world, I thought. I feel like that too. I didn't talk to anyone that night because I was just way too overwhelmed with these conflicting emotions. It took me a few days to digest what I had just experienced. Now, a few days later, I went to this porno theater called The Warehouse because I thought that's what gay guys were supposed to do. Remember that all I knew about gay people up to that point, I learned from priests, nuns, and books and magazines I got from a porno bookstore. I parked my car in the back so that no one could see me, and I pulled my collar up so I wouldn't be less likely to be recognized, and sheepishly walked in. I paid for my ticket, and the helpful desk clerk motioned me to the door to the theater. Now, in hindsight, he was probably being so helpful because I'm sure he could tell that I had never been to a place like this before. I opened these ornate double doors and was about to walk in when I saw what was on the movie screen. I mean, the screen was pretty standard for a theater. I mean, they're huge. I saw a man in a bathroom with two other men on their knees facing away from us. The man had both of his hands up to the forearm inside the other two men's butts, and he was working them with a vengeance. I turned and ran in horror back to the sanctity of my own home in another state of extreme, though this time not conflicting emotions. So I wasn't conflicted about this at all. I can only imagine the knowing smile on the clerk's face as I went running out. I felt lost in the world again because if that's what I have to do to be gay, I'm ready to reconsider my decision right here, right now. That stuff was way too adult for me. Still is, come to think of it. I never went back to the theater, but I did go back to Hisco Disco. I went frequently until my conflicting emotions gave way to a kind of sanity that was pretty new to me. Hisco Disco was the place where I was when I first recognized that maybe there wasn't really anything wrong with me and that I wasn't alone as I had always felt like I was. The place where for the first time in my life I felt like I belonged. I was with my people. I have never looked back to the days when I was struggling with myself over who I am. Well, except for that time in the porno theater, but there has never been a reason to. Granted, I still had to endure the slurs about sexuality that I had always had to deal with ever since I could remember. My nicknames on school playgrounds were things like Honey, Audie. Oh, for a while I was Pussy Galore after the James Bond character in Goldfinger. Along with the standards, queer, which I still find offensive today, fag, faggot, poofter, light in the loafers, candy ass, fudge packer. There's a whole dictionary of these terms, and I'm pretty sure that I've been called each one of them at one time or another. But the fact is that it doesn't hurt nearly as much as it did back when I was completely alone, or I thought I was. But now it's possible to have a peaceful inner life, a life of knowing what this straight conservative Christian guy learned from his experience. I hope you'll read about it. The gay community that he refers to, interestingly enough, is the same gay community, Portland, Oregon, that has embraced me and I it. In a way that has made it possible for me to have a sense of peace within myself and focus my energies on things that really matter rather than an internal struggle against religious teachings. In any gay community, anywhere in the world, you will find a lot of hugging and kissing and touching and a lot of emotional support and a lot of acceptance. It is because every gay person that you know has done his or her own vision quest to get where they are today. That takes deep and fierce courage and a determination to be real with yourself. It seems kind of ironic when you consider that the most visible elements of our culture are drag queens and leather folks. They are the real leaders of our community because they have traveled even further than most of us have into their personal vision quest, expert enough to play with the illusions of masculinity and femininity without getting burned by it. But what brings my culture together at our core is stories like the one I'm telling you now. We share the experience of rejection, and we know how much that injures the human spirit. That's why we are mostly accepting of others. We have a ways to go in that department, of course, but not nearly as much as straight people do. And it's because we have had to challenge our entire existence in ways that straight people have rarely even had to think about. Why would they? Straight people are not strangers in a strange land like we are. They live in their own house. That's why I'm so impressed with this Timothy Couric fellow. He didn't have to do that, but he did it anyway because he really wanted to experience what it's like to be gay. That says a lot about his character. My culture is expert at illusion and superficiality because we all, at some point or another, have had to live a superficial illusion to survive. We have been pushed out to the edge of our survival, and most of us found a way to come back and live here anyway. I have empathy for those among us that didn't find a way to come back. I have the cultural competence to be able to recognize window dressing at 4 blocks. It's not that easy to trick a gay person after their vision quest. In fact, we may even be a little more tuned in than most. Anytime you want to know what the next big song on the radio is going to be, all you have to do is go to a gay dance club tonight and listen for a while. You'll be hearing watered down, shortened versions of those very songs on your top 40 radio stations sometime soon. That's where hit records come from. Homosexuality is a culture, so much so that when I'm filling out forms that ask what race I am, if there's an option for other, that's what I check because of all the options listed on those forms. That's the one that's closest to what I am. I'm glad that Timothy Couric infiltrated my community and experienced what he experienced, and I'm equally glad that he wants you to know about it. I wish more brave heterosexual souls would do that. After all, it's only fair. We have been immersed in their world for our entire lives. We know all about the straight world. Maybe it's time that they get a good look at ours. I want to thank you for hanging in with me so far, and if you find anything of value here, please take a second to like and subscribe with the buttons below. Oh, and don't forget my books, Basic Video Production, Everything You Need to Know to Make Video Like a Professional, and my memoir. I talk about some of the stuff that I talked about here in the video. Searching for Saint Germain, the true story of a gay Catholic orphan. You'll find links for both of those books in the description below. And if you have Kindle Plus, you can read both of them for free. I'm also leaving a link to Tim Couric's book, Across in the Closet, for you, should you be interested in what he found out about the community here in Portland, Oregon. Meanwhile, my name is Gregory, and this has been The View from Out Here. Much love.
Well, it's almost here.